Sarah, let's start with this. What does freedom taste like to someone who's never had it?
You know, Tony, that's beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. When I first walked into a grocery store at 38, I stood in the cereal aisle and cried. 27 different types of cereal. For 2 decades, I ate what he decided, wore what he chose, spoke when he permitted. That grocery store represented choices I never knew existed. Freedom tastes like possibility, but it also tastes like terror. Every decision from picking breakfast to choosing where to live felt overwhelming. In the compound, my path was predetermined. Wake up, serve my sister wives, bear children, obey without question. Outside those walls, freedom tasted like standing at a crossroads with infinite directions and no map to guide me.
But Sarah, what made you finally risk everything to run when the consequences could have been deadly?
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Sarah, when our listeners heard your story last week, the response was overwhelming. People want to understand how someone builds a life after escaping something so all-encompassing. But before we talk about your new beginning, help us understand what you left behind. What was a typical day like in that community?
Tony, when people hear the word cult, they picture dramatic scenes from movies. But the truth is, most days felt painfully ordinary. I'd wake before dawn to start breakfast for my husband's other wives and their children. The kitchen was always filled with the smell of biscuits and bacon, the sound of little feet running across wooden floors.
You mentioned other wives. How many families were you managing alongside?
3 other women lived in that house with me, 12 children between us all. The youngest was barely walking when I left, and the oldest was 16. That boy called me Aunt Sarah, even though his father was also my husband. Pause. It's strange how normal that felt then, Tony. How wrong feels right when it's all you've ever known.
Walk us through those morning hours. What happened after breakfast?
The older children would head to our community school, which was really just a converted barn where we taught reading, writing, and scripture. Nothing else. The women would gather for what we called morning devotions, but it was really just reinforcement. Sister Martha would read from the prophet's teachings while we mended clothes or preserved food.
Sister Martha. She was significant in the community?
The prophet's first wife, a woman in her 70s who'd lived in that compound since she was 14. Her voice was like sandpaper, Tony, rough from decades of reciting the same prayers. But her eyes, long pause, her eyes held something I didn't understand until years later. Fear. Bone-deep, constant fear.
Fear of what, Sarah?
Of questioning. Of stepping outside the boundaries. Of losing what little security we had. Sister Martha had watched dozens of young women come and go over the decades. Some aged out of favor. Some were reassigned to other men. Some simply disappeared in the middle of the night.
Disappeared?
The prophet called it being called away to serve in other communities, but we never heard from them again. No letters, no visits, just empty beds and whispered prayers that we wouldn't be next.
How did the other wives in your household handle this uncertainty?
Each woman coped differently. Tony. Rebecca, the second wife, threw herself into caring for the children. She'd braid their hair with such careful precision, as if perfect plaits could keep them safe. Anna, the third wife, barely spoke above a whisper. She'd been there the longest and had learned that silence was survival.
And the first wife?
Catherine. Pause. Catherine was the prophet's niece, married to my husband when she was 15. By the time I arrived, she carried herself like royalty, but broken royalty. She wore her authority like armor, Tony, but underneath she was just as trapped as the rest of us.
What was your relationship with these women like day to day?
We functioned like a well-rehearsed dance, Tony. Everyone knew their steps, their timing, their place. Catherine assigned the daily tasks. Rebecca managed the children's schedules. Anna handled the garden and food storage. I was responsible for maintaining the household accounts and managing supplies.
That sounds like significant responsibility for someone so young.
I was good with numbers, always had been. But Tony, Those ledgers told stories the prophet didn't want told, how much money flowed into the community versus how little was spent on the families, how supplies meant for the children somehow got redirected to the prophet's personal compound.
You were keeping track of financial discrepancies?
Not intentionally, not at first. But when you're stretching every dollar to feed 12 children while watching trucks deliver luxury items to the prophet's house, you start noticing patterns. I kept detailed records because I was told to, but those records became evidence of something much larger.
Tell me about the children, Sarah. What was their daily life like?
Tony, those children lived in a world of whispers and rigid rules. The boys knew they'd either become future leaders or be cast out when they reached 16. Too many young men threatened the older men's control over the young women. The girls knew they were being watched, evaluated, prepared for marriage assignments that could come any day after their 14th birthday.
14. That must have been difficult to witness.
I watched girls I'd helped raise disappear into marriages with men old enough to be their grandfathers. Sarah Beth was the hardest. Pause. She was Catherine's daughter, bright as sunshine, always asking questions about the world beyond our fences. The day she turned 14, the prophet announced her engagement to a man in his 60s.
How did Catherine handle her daughter's assignment?
That night, I found Catherine in the pantry, surrounded by jars of preserved peaches, sobbing so quietly I almost didn't hear her. But she never said a word against the prophet's decision. None of us did. Speaking against the prophet meant losing everything, including access to our children.
Sarah, what sustained you during those years? What kept you going?
Books, Tony. Hidden books. Anna had smuggled in a few novels over the years, keeping them behind loose boards in the root cellar. When I could steal moments alone, I'd read about women making choices, traveling, having careers. Those stories planted seeds I didn't even realize were growing.
What kinds of books?
Jane Eyre was the first one that really affected me. Here was a woman who refused to accept a life that diminished her, even when it meant leaving behind security. I must have read that book 20 times, Tony, memorizing passages that reminded me that strength wasn't just about endurance.
Did you share these books with the other wives?
Never directly. Too dangerous. But sometimes I'd quote passages during our evening talks, presenting them as my own thoughts. I'd see something flicker in Rebecca's eyes, or catch Anna nodding slowly. We were all hungry for something we couldn't name.
What about your husband during this period? What was his role in your daily life?
David was 25 years older than me, Tony. A man who saw wives as assets and children as proof of his righteousness. He'd rotate through our bedrooms on a schedule, share meals with us as a group, and expect complete deference in all decisions. But he wasn't cruel in obvious ways. He provided food, shelter, protection within the community structure.
That must have been confusing, having care mixed with control.
Exactly, Tony. David genuinely believed he was saving our souls by keeping us within the prophet's teachings. He'd bring small gifts sometimes, a piece of fabric for a new dress or special ingredients for holiday meals. It would have been easier to hate him if he'd been obviously evil.
How did the prophet maintain control over such a large community?
Through isolation and information control, Tony. We received news about the outside world only through his interpretation. Every natural disaster, every piece of social upheaval, every economic problem was presented as proof that the end times were coming, and only the faithful would be saved.
You mentioned the compound was isolated. Describe the physical setting for our listeners.
Picture rolling hills in rural Utah, Tony. Beautiful country that felt like a prison. The main road was miles away, and the prophet controlled the only vehicles. Our houses were scattered across several hundred acres, each one visible from his central compound. He could watch every family's comings and goings.
Were there ever attempts by people to leave?
A few, over the years. Usually young men who'd been marked for expulsion anyway. But Tony, leaving meant abandoning every relationship, every security, every skill you'd ever developed. Most people stayed not because they believed, but because they couldn't imagine surviving anywhere else.
What about outside interference? Government agencies? concerned relatives.
The prophet had lawyers, Tony. Good ones. He knew exactly how to structure the community to avoid legal problems. Officially, every adult was there voluntarily. The marriages were spiritual, not legal. The children were homeschooled, within legal guidelines. On paper, everything looked legitimate.
But the reality was different.
The reality was a system designed to keep people trapped through economic dependence, social isolation, and psychological control. Every aspect of daily life reinforced the message that safety existed only within the prophet's protection, that the outside world was dangerous and corrupt.
Sarah, as you lived through this daily routine for years, when did you first start questioning whether this was the life you wanted?
It started small, Tony. Little moments when the cognitive dissonance became too obvious to ignore. Watching the prophet's own children receive educations denied to the rest of us. Seeing him purchase luxury items while families went without basic medical care. But the real shift came when I turned 35 and realized I'd lived my entire adult life without making a single meaningful choice about my own future.
That's a powerful realization. What triggered that specific moment of clarity?
Rebecca's daughter started her monthly cycles, and I watched this beautiful, intelligent girl transform overnight from a child into a commodity. The way the older men suddenly noticed her, the way conversation stopped when she entered a room. I saw my own past and her future, and something inside me just broke open.
How long did it take between that realization and your actual escape?
3 years, Tony. 3 years of careful planning, secret saving, and building the courage to leave behind everything and everyone I'd ever known. But that's a story for next time, isn't it?
Certainly is, Sarah. Thank you for sharing these intimate details about daily life in such a controlled environment. Next week, we'll explore how you began planning your escape and what finally gave you the courage to run.
Thank you, Tony. Telling this story isn't easy, but if it helps even one person recognize their own situation or find their own courage, then it's worth revisiting these memories.
Sarah, I want to take our listeners back to the beginning, before you made that incredible escape. Can you paint a picture of what life looked like in the compound? What would someone see if they walked through those gates?
The first thing that would strike you, Tony, is how isolated it felt. 20-foot walls topped with barbed wire, surrounding about 300 acres of red Utah desert. Inside those walls, it was like stepping back in time. No cars except for the elders' vehicles. Women in long prairie dresses, hair braided down our backs. Children everywhere, running barefoot between the houses.
You mentioned houses, plural. This wasn't just one family living there.
Oh no, there were maybe 40 families. But when I say families, I mean the way Prophet Ezekiel defined them. One man, multiple wives, dozens of children. The houses were these sprawling structures, built room by room as each new wife joined the family. My husband's house had 7 bedrooms when I left. 7 wives, 32 children.
That's where you lived for 20 years. Tell me about your daily routine. What did morning look like for you?
Long pause. I was the 3rd wife, so I had specific duties. Up at 4:30 for morning prayers. The kitchen was my responsibility on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. 20 people for breakfast, Tony. 20 people who barely looked at each other across that long wooden table because the silence was so thick you could cut it with the butter knife.
Silence?
Meals were quiet time for reflection on Scripture. At least, that's what they called it. Really, it was just another way to control us. Hard to plan an escape when you can't even ask someone to pass the salt without permission.
You were married at 18. That's quite young to be thrust into such a complex family dynamic.
Bitter laugh, young doesn't begin to cover it, Tony. I'd never been off the compound. Never seen a movie. Never used a phone. Never even chosen my own clothes. Then suddenly, I'm wife number 3 to a man I'd spoken to maybe 5 times in my entire life. A man who was 42 years old and already had 11 children.
How did that selection process work? Did you have any say in the matter?
Prophet Ezekiel would receive revelations about celestial marriages. That's what they called them. He'd announce during Sunday service, that God had revealed who should be joined in holy matrimony. The women would just sit there, hands folded, waiting to hear if their life was about to change forever. When he said my name paired with Brother Samuel's, I felt like the ground was falling away beneath me.
What was your husband like, Sarah? Help us understand the man you were bound to for 2 decades.
Samuel was what they called a faithful steward. He managed the compound's finances, made sure everyone followed Prophet Ezekiel's rules to the letter. He wore these wire-rimmed glasses and always smelled like the lavender soap we made in the workshop. Not unkind exactly, but distant. Clinical. Like we were livestock, he was responsible for feeding and housing.
And the other wives? How did those relationships work?
The first wife, Rebecca, she ran the household with an iron fist. Been there since she was 16, so by the time I arrived, she'd had 25 years to perfect the system. Every wife knew her place, her duties, her schedule for. Pause for intimate time with Samuel. Rebecca would post it on the kitchen wall like it was a chore rotation.
That must have been incredibly difficult to navigate as a young woman.
You learn to disappear inside yourself, Tony. To find some small corner of your mind that they can't touch with their rules and schedules and prophecies. I used to imagine what the world looked like beyond those walls, what other women my age were doing with their lives while I was pregnant with my 3rd child before my 21st birthday.
3 children by 21. How did motherhood change your perspective?
It made everything more complicated, because as much as I began to question Prophet Ezekiel's teachings, as much as I started to see the cracks in their perfect system, I loved my babies fiercely. My daughter Emma, my sons Michael and David. They were the bright spots in a world that felt increasingly dark.
When did you first start questioning the teachings? What planted those seeds of doubt?
There was an incident when Emma was about 7. She'd been asking questions about the outside world, curious the way children are. Rebecca reported her to Prophet Ezekiel for showing signs of rebellion. I watched him grip my little girl's shoulders and tell her that curious girls often found themselves cast out into darkness, where predators waited to devour them.
How did that make you feel?
Rage, Tony. Pure, white-hot rage, but also terror, because feeling that angry at the prophet was supposed to be impossible for someone with true faith. That's when I started paying attention differently, watching how the men interacted with each other versus how they treated us, noticing which families got better food allotments, whose children got to attend the school sessions.
There was inequality even within the compound structure?
Oh, yes. Prophet Ezekiel's inner circle lived very differently than the rest of us. Better houses, newer clothes. Their wives got medical attention when they needed it. The rest of us made do with herbal remedies and prayer. I watched 3 women die in childbirth, Tony, because taking them to a hospital would have meant contact with the outside world.
That's horrific. Did anyone ever challenge these decisions?
There was a man named Brother Thomas, who questioned why his wife couldn't see a doctor when she developed what was clearly a serious infection. 2 days later, he and his entire family disappeared. Prophet Ezekiel announced they'd been called to serve in another location, but their house stood empty, and we never heard from them again.
What did you think happened to them?
I didn't want to think about it. But after I escaped, after I learned how the world actually works, I realized there were probably shallow graves somewhere in that desert. Prophet Ezekiel didn't tolerate dissent, and he had men loyal enough to handle problems quietly.
So you were living in fear, essentially.
Fear becomes background noise after a while. What really ate at me was watching my children grow up in that environment, seeing Emma start to flinch when men spoke to her, watching my boys learn that women existed to serve and obey. I knew I was running out of time before they became completely indoctrinated.
Is that when you started planning your escape?
The planning phase took almost 3 years, Tony. You have to understand, I'd never driven a car, never handled money, never even been alone outside those walls. I had to learn everything in secret while pretending to be the perfect plural wife. It was like preparing for a mission to another planet.
We're going to explore that preparation and the escape itself in our next conversation. But I'm curious, Sarah, looking back now, what do you want people to understand about that time in your life?
That we weren't weak or stupid, despite what people might think. We were surviving a system designed to break us down completely, and some of us found ways to stay human despite everything they did to convince us we weren't worth saving.
Sarah, I want to take our listeners back to that moment when you first walked into my office 3 months ago. You looked like someone who'd been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders.
I remember feeling so out of place, Tony. Your waiting room had these magazines with women on the covers wearing clothes I'd never been allowed to even imagine. The receptionist offered me coffee, and I didn't know what to say because we only drank herbal tea in the community.
What was going through your mind during those first few minutes of freedom?
Terror, honestly. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see one of the elders walking through that door. Even the sounds were overwhelming. Cars honking, people talking loudly on their phones, music playing from somewhere. In our compound, silence was golden. Children learned early that noise brought punishment.
Tell me about the compound itself. How would you describe it to someone who's never seen such a place?
Picture a collection of plain wooden buildings surrounded by a 12-foot fence topped with barbed wire. We were told it was to keep the outside world from corrupting us, but looking back, it was clearly designed to keep us in. The main house where Prophet David lived was the only building with any color, painted white with blue trim. The rest of us lived in these gray, weathered structures that looked more like barracks than homes.
And you lived there with your assigned husband and his other wives?
Long pause, yes. Marcus was chosen for me by Prophet David on my 18th birthday. I was told it was an honor because Marcus was already 35 and considered one of the faithful. He had 2 other wives already, Rebecca and Martha. We all shared this cramped space with thin walls where you could hear everything your sister wives were going through.
How did the other women treat you when you first arrived in that household?
Rebecca had been Marcus's first wife for almost 15 years by then. She ran that house with an iron fist, just like she'd been taught. Martha was quieter, more broken. She'd lost 3 babies by the time I came along, and I could see in her eyes that something had died inside her with each loss. They weren't cruel to me, Tony. They were just surviving the only way they knew how.
What was a typical day like in your world back then?
We'd wake before dawn for morning prayers. Prophet David's voice would come through the speakers mounted in every room, reminding us of our duties and our place. After prayers, the women would prepare breakfast for the men, who ate first. We ate what was left. Then came the endless chores, washing, cleaning, tending the garden, preserving food. The men worked the fields or handled business in town, but they never told us what kind of business.
You mentioned speakers in every room. That sounds rather controlling.
Everything was controlled, Tony. What we wore, what we ate, when we spoke, who we spoke to. The speakers meant Prophet David could reach us any time, day or night. Sometimes I'd wake to his voice at 3 in the morning, calling for special prayer sessions or announcing new revelations. We weren't allowed to turn them off.
What about education? Were you able to read, to learn about the outside world?
We learned to read using only approved books. The Bible, of course, but Prophet David's version with his own interpretations written in the margins. We had textbooks, but they were decades old and had been edited. Anything about science, history, or government that contradicted Prophet David's teachings was crossed out with black marker. I didn't know women could vote until I escaped, Tony. I didn't know they could own property or have careers.
When did you first start questioning what you'd been taught?
Pause. It was gradual. Small things that didn't add up. Prophet David preached about simplicity and sacrifice, but his house had luxuries we weren't allowed. Air conditioning, television, expensive cars parked outside. He said the outside world was evil and dangerous, but then I'd see him return from his trips wearing expensive suits and jewelry.
Those trips he took, did anyone know where he went?
The elders knew, but they never spoke about it. Sometimes men would come to visit him, strangers who drove fancy cars and wore sunglasses even at night. They'd meet in his house, and we'd be ordered to stay in our quarters until they left. The next day, there would always be new rules or sudden changes to our routines.
Sarah, I have to ask about the children in the community. What was their life like?
Voice softening. That's the hardest part to talk about, Tony. The children belong to the community, not to their mothers. Boys were raised to become future husbands and workers. Girls were raised to become wives, nothing more. Education stopped at age 14 for girls, 16 for boys. After that, it was all about preparation for their assigned roles.
Did you have children during your time there?
I was blessed with one daughter, Emma. She'd be 18 now, the age I was when I was married off. Pause. Leaving her behind was the most agonizing decision I've ever made, but I knew if I stayed, she'd suffer the same fate I did. Prophet David was already watching her, making comments about her development.
That must have been terrifying for you as a mother.
It was the final push I needed to plan my escape. I started noticing things more carefully after that. The way certain men looked at the teenage girls, the way girls would disappear for days and come back different, quieter. I realized I wasn't just trapped in a marriage I never wanted, I was trapped in something much darker.
When we continue, I'd like to talk about those final months before your escape. But first, how are you feeling right now, sharing these memories?
It's painful but necessary, Tony. Every word I speak here is another step away from the silence they forced on me for 20 years.
Sarah, you mentioned that for nearly 2 decades, you found ways to cope with your situation in the compound. But something changed, something that made you realize you had to leave. Can you walk me through what happened?
Long pause. It wasn't my story that broke me, Tony. It was watching it happen all over again, to someone else's daughter.
Tell me about that.
Her name was Rebecca. She was the daughter of one of the other wives in our family unit. Sweet girl. Always had her nose in books when the elders weren't watching. She reminded me so much of myself at that age, always asking questions, always wondering what was beyond those gates.
How old was she?
She had just turned 17. Still had that light in her eyes, you know? That spark that the compound hadn't quite extinguished yet. I remember thinking, maybe she'll be different. Maybe they'll let her wait a little longer, let her grow up first.
But that's not what happened.
Prophet Matthias called a special assembly one Sunday morning, said the Lord had given him a revelation during his prayers. Pa's Rebecca was to be sealed in marriage to Elder Harrison.
How did you react to hearing that?
I felt like I was 17 again, sitting in that same chapel, hearing my own fate announced. But this time I wasn't the naive girl accepting it as God's will. I was a woman who knew exactly what that announcement meant for Rebecca's life.
What did you know about Elder Harrison?
He was 63 years old, Tony. Already had 4 wives. The youngest couldn't have been more than 25. He had a reputation for being particularly strict with his households. The women in his family rarely spoke above a whisper, and they always looked tired, worn down.
How did Rebecca respond when she heard the announcement?
She didn't say anything during the assembly. None of us would have dared. But I saw her face. The color just drained right out of it. After the service, I found her behind the community garden, crying.
Did you speak with her?
I knew I shouldn't have. We weren't supposed to interfere with the prophet's revelations, but I couldn't walk away. I sat down next to her and asked if she was all right.
What did she say?
She looked at me with these big, terrified eyes and whispered, "Sister Sarah, I don't want to marry him. He scares me." And then she asked me something that just shattered my heart.
What did she ask?
She said, "Did you want to marry Brother Joseph when you were my age?" And I realized I had 2 choices. I could lie to her, tell her it was an honor and a blessing, feed her the same words everyone had fed me, or I could tell her the truth.
Which did you choose?
I told her the truth, Tony. I said no, I didn't want to marry him, that I was scared too, that it was normal to feel that way. And then she asked me if it got easier.
What did you tell her?
Pause. I couldn't lie to her again. I told her that some days were better than others, but that the fear never really goes away, that you learn to make yourself smaller and quieter until you almost disappear.
How did she respond to that?
She started crying harder and said she wanted to run away, asked me if I thought God would really punish her if she left. And sitting there with this terrified girl, I realized I didn't have an answer that would comfort her because I'd been asking myself the same question for 20 years.
Did anyone else know about this conversation?
Sister Margaret, one of Elder Harrison's existing wives, saw us talking. I didn't realize it at the time, but she reported it to her husband, who told the prophet.
What happened then?
That evening, Brother Joseph came home in a rage, said I'd been filling a young sister's head with doubts and rebellion, that I was being influenced by Satan and corrupting others.
How did he express that anger?
Pause. He reminded me what happened to wives who became a source of spiritual contamination. Said perhaps I needed to spend some time in prayer and fasting to cleanse my heart of these evil thoughts.
And Rebecca? What happened to her?
The wedding was moved up. Instead of waiting a few months, Prophet Matthias announced it would happen the following week. Said the Lord had revealed that delay would only invite more temptation.
How did you feel when you heard that?
Responsible, Tony. Like I had made everything worse for her by telling the truth, but also angry. Angrier than I'd ever allowed myself to feel before. This wasn't about God or revelation or spiritual guidance. This was about control, about making sure a 17-year-old girl didn't have time to think or question or resist.
Were you able to speak with Rebecca again before the wedding?
They made sure I wasn't. She was kept busy with wedding preparations, and I was assigned extra duties that kept me away from the main compound. But I saw her on her wedding day, walking down that aisle in her white dress.
What did you see in her face?
Nothing, Tony. That light I'd seen in her eyes was just gone. She looked like a ghost of herself, and I realized that's what I must have looked like 20 years earlier. That's what all of us looked like.
Is that when you knew you had to leave?
That's when I knew I couldn't stay. Watching Rebecca's spirit break in real time, knowing I could have prevented it if I'd been brave enough to do more than just tell her the truth. I realized that every day I stayed was another day I was complicit in this system that destroys young women.
So what did you do?
I started planning my escape.
Sarah, you've mentioned that life in the community had its routines, its predictable patterns. But there must have been a moment when something shifted, when the foundation you'd built your understanding on began to crack. Can you walk me through what that looked like?
Long pause. It was a Tuesday morning in March. I remember because the snow was melting, and I was hanging laundry on the line behind our house. Samuel had been called to another meeting with Elder Morrison the night before, and when he came home, he was different. Quiet in a way that felt dangerous.
Different how? What did you notice first?
He wouldn't look at me directly. For 20 years of marriage, Samuel always looked at me when he spoke, even when he was angry, even when he was delivering one of Elder Morrison's directives about how I should conduct myself. But that morning, he kept his eyes on his breakfast plate and said the words that would change everything.
What did he tell you?
He said Elder Morrison had received a revelation, that I was to be given to Brother Marcus as his fourth wife, that my purpose in Samuel's household had been fulfilled, and it was time for me to serve the community in a new capacity. Pause. He said it like he was discussing the weather, Tony, like 20 years of my life could just be reassigned with a divine memo.
How did you respond in that moment?
I dropped the coffee pot. It shattered on the kitchen floor, and I just stood there staring at the pieces. Samuel finally looked up then, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. He was afraid of me, of my reaction. That's when I realized he knew. Somewhere deep down he knew this was wrong.
Had you ever questioned the system before that moment?
Never out loud. You learn not to, growing up in that world. But standing there, looking at my husband of 20 years tell me I was being traded like livestock, something broke open inside me. I asked him a question I'd never dared ask before.
What did you ask?
I asked him if he loved me. Pause, such a simple thing, Tony, but in our community, love wasn't discussed. Duty was discussed. Service to God and Elder Morrison was discussed. But love? That was considered selfish, worldly thinking.
How did Samuel respond?
He looked stricken, actually stricken. He opened his mouth twice before any words came out, and when they did, he said something that haunts me still. He said, "Sarah, love is a luxury we can't afford in God's plan." But his voice cracked when he said it.
That must have been devastating to hear.
It was, but it was also clarifying. Because in that crack in his voice, I heard 20 years of his own suppressed feelings. I realized we'd both been prisoners, Tony. He just accepted his chains more completely than I ever could.
What happened next? How did the conversation continue?
I asked him about Brother Marcus. I'd seen how he treated his other wives, the bruises they tried to hide, the way they flinched when he raised his voice. Samuel knew about it too. Everyone did. But when I brought it up, he just repeated what Elder Morrison had told him about women needing firm guidance.
You must have felt trapped.
Worse than trapped. I felt erased. But then Samuel said something that lit a fire in me I didn't know existed. He said that if I truly had faith, I would accept this blessing with gratitude, that my resistance proved I'd been corrupted by prideful thinking.
That word, corrupted, how did that land with you?
Like a slap. Because I realized that everything I'd ever felt, every moment of doubt or question or basic human need for agency, had been labeled as corruption. My desire to choose my own path, to have a voice in my own life, to be seen as a person rather than property, all of it was evidence of my spiritual failure.
So this conversation became more than just news about a reassignment.
It became a revelation of my own. I saw the whole system clearly for the first time. The way control was maintained through shame, through convincing us that our most basic human instincts were sinful. I looked at Samuel, this man I'd shared a bed with for 20 years, and realized he was a stranger. Worse, he was my jailer.
When you think back to that moment, standing in your kitchen with broken coffee cup pieces at your feet, what was the strongest emotion you felt?
Rage, Tony. Pure, clean rage. And for the first time in my life, I didn't try to push it down or pray it away. I let it fill me up, and I knew that everything was about to change.
Sarah, we've been talking about your escape, but I'm curious about something deeper. After 20 years in that environment, how did you even begin to process the idea that change was possible?
Long pause. You know, Tony, I think the human spirit has this way of preserving itself, even when everything around you is designed to crush it. For years, I told myself I was adapting, surviving, but really there was this tiny voice that never went completely silent.
What did that voice sound like?
It sounded like the 18-year-old girl who used to dream about becoming a teacher. Before the marriage, before Joseph decided my path for me. Sometimes, late at night when my husband was with his other wives, I'd remember sitting in my father's truck, listening to the radio, and hearing women talk about their jobs, their choices. That voice would whisper, "This isn't the only way."
How did you keep that voice alive for 2 decades?
I almost didn't. There were years, especially after my second miscarriage, when I thought maybe Joseph was right. Maybe I was being punished for my lack of faith, my secret doubts. But then I'd see the younger girls being brought in, girls who looked exactly like I did at 18, and something in me would rebel.
Tell me about those girls.
Voice softening. There was this one girl, Rebecca. 15 years old, Tony. 15. Joseph had been watching her for months, talking about her spiritual readiness for marriage. I watched her mother prepare her, the same way mine had prepared me. The same white dress, the same terrified look, the same acceptance that this was God's will.
What did you do?
At first, nothing. I was a coward, but I started small. I'd find reasons to talk with her, to slip her books that the other wives had hidden away, geography books, history books. I'd tell her about the outside world, carefully, always framing it as Satan's temptations we needed to pray against.
You were planting seeds.
I was trying to give her what no one gave me: information, choice. Even if she couldn't use it then, I wanted her to know there was a world beyond the compound walls, that women could drive cars and own businesses and choose when to have children.
How did this affect your relationship with your husband?
Michael started noticing changes in me around this time. I was asking more questions during our weekly meetings with Joseph. Why couldn't the women attend the financial planning sessions? Why were only the men allowed to leave the compound for business? I framed it as wanting to be more helpful, more useful to the community.
But he sensed something else.
Michael wasn't stupid, Tony. He'd been Joseph's right hand for 15 years. He knew how to spot dissent. He started watching me more carefully, asking other wives to report on my activities. The paranoia that kept the compound running started focusing on me.
That must have been terrifying.
It was liberating. Pause. I know that sounds strange, but for the first time in years, I felt alive. Dangerous, yes, but alive. I was making choices again, even if they were small ones, even if they put me at risk.
Was Rebecca the only one you tried to help?
No, there were others. I started what I called prayer circles with some of the younger wives. We'd meet to discuss scripture, but really we were sharing our fears, our questions. Some of them had never even spoken about their doubts out loud.
How long did this continue before you were discovered?
About 8 months. One of the women, Maria, got scared and confessed everything to Joseph. She thought she was saving her soul, protecting the community from my spiritual sickness.
How did you find out?
Joseph called me to his office on a Tuesday morning. That walk across the compound felt like walking to my execution. The other wives wouldn't make eye contact. Children who usually ran up to hug me stepped back. I knew.
What was going through your mind during that walk?
Strangely, I felt calm. For months, I'd been living with this constant fear of discovery. Now that it was here, there was almost relief. I remember thinking about my grandmother, how she used to say that truth has weight to it, and lies make you float away from yourself. I'd been floating for 20 years, Tony. That morning I finally felt my feet touch the ground.
Even though you knew what was waiting for you in that office?
Especially because I knew. Whatever Joseph was planning for me, I would face it as myself. Not as the woman he'd tried to create, not as the wife Michael thought he owned, but as Sarah. The real Sarah, for the first time in 20 years.
Sarah, we've talked about that first night away from the compound, but I imagine the real challenge was the days and weeks that followed. How do you begin to rebuild when everything you've ever known has been stripped away?
Long pause. You know, Tony, people assume the hardest part of leaving was making that decision to run. But honestly, the hardest part was learning how to make any decision at all. For 20 years, every choice had been made for me. What to wear, what to eat, when to speak, when to be silent.
That level of control must have been suffocating, but also, in a twisted way, predictable. Was there a part of you that missed that structure even knowing how harmful it was?
Soft laugh. That's exactly it. The freedom was terrifying. I remember standing in a grocery store 3 days after I left, just staring at cereal boxes. Dozens of them. I started crying right there in the aisle because I couldn't understand how people chose between so many options. A woman asked if I was okay, and I couldn't even explain what was wrong.
Those small moments of overwhelm must have happened constantly. How did you begin to trust your own judgment?
Very slowly, and with a lot of mistakes. I had this caseworker, Maria, who worked with people leaving religious communities. She taught me something I'll never forget. She said, "Start with the smallest possible choices and work your way up." So I practiced choosing. Coffee or tea, walk or bus. Simple things where there wasn't really a wrong answer.
That's remarkably patient guidance. But I imagine there were bigger decisions pressing on you too. You mentioned last time that you were considering whether to speak out about what you'd experienced.
Pause that was eating at me constantly. Because I knew I wasn't the only one still suffering. There were girls back there, Tony. Some of them barely 18, just like I had been, married off to men in their 50s and 60s. having babies before they were ready, never learning to read properly or understand the world beyond those gates.
The weight of that knowledge, knowing you had information that could potentially help others, that must have created enormous internal conflict.
It did. But I was also terrified, not just of them finding me, though that fear was real. I was terrified of not being believed, of being seen as some hysterical woman making accusations against a respected religious leader. You have to understand, to the outside world, Elder Matthews was this charismatic figure who did charity work and spoke beautifully about faith and community.
So you were carrying this double burden, your own healing and this sense of responsibility toward people still trapped in that environment.
Exactly. And I was learning that the world outside wasn't necessarily equipped to understand what I'd been through. People would ask me things like, "Why didn't you just leave sooner?" As if I'd been choosing to stay at a bad hotel instead of being systematically broken down and controlled since childhood.
Those kinds of questions must have felt like additional wounds. How did you find people who could truly understand?
Maria connected me with other women. Some who'd left different groups, some who'd survived other kinds of long-term abuse. There was this moment, maybe 2 months after I'd gotten out, sitting in a circle with 5 other women. And I realized I wasn't explaining myself anymore. I was just talking about what happened, without shame or justification.
That sounds like a profound shift. When did you first begin to consider that your story might have power beyond your own healing?
Pause. There was a news report about a girl who'd gone missing from a community about 3 hours from where I'd been. 16 years old. The police were treating it like a runaway case, but I recognized the signs, the way her family talked about her, the vague statements about her needing spiritual guidance. I knew she hadn't run away. She'd been placed somewhere.
And that's when you realized your silence might be protecting the very system that had harmed you.
I called the tip line that night, told them what to look for, what questions to ask. They found her a week later, married to a 45-year-old man in a sister community. That's when I understood that my knowledge wasn't just about my own survival anymore.
That must have been both empowering and frightening, to see your information make a real difference.
It was everything at once, Tony. Relief that she was safe, anger that she'd needed saving at all, and this growing certainty that I couldn't stay hidden forever, not when there were others who needed someone to speak for them.
It sounds like you were beginning to transform from survivor to advocate, even if you didn't fully realize it yet.
That's exactly right, though I had no idea how dangerous that transformation would become.
We've been talking for a while now, Sarah, and I can see this is taking a toll. But there's something I need to ask about the children you left behind. How do you carry that weight?
Long pause. That's the question that keeps me awake at night, Tony. I had 3 children in the compound. My eldest, Rebecca, was 16 when I left. The twins, Michael and Ruth, were only 12.
16. That's close to the age when girls are typically married off in these communities, isn't it?
Exactly. And that's what terrified me most. I could see Brother Marcus watching Rebecca during the community gatherings, the way his eyes followed her. She was becoming a woman, and I knew what that meant in his world.
So leaving wasn't just about saving yourself.
I told myself I was saving her too. That somehow, by exposing the truth about the compound, I could protect her from the life I'd been forced into. But Tony, the reality is, I abandoned my children to save myself, and that's something I have to live with every single day.
Have you had any contact with them since you left?
None. The compound has strict rules about apostates. To them, I'm dead. Worse than dead, actually. I'm a corrupted soul who chose Satan over God's chosen family.
What do you think they were told about your disappearance?
Bitter laugh. Oh, I know exactly what they were told. I managed to get word through someone who left a year after me. Brother Marcus told the community that I had been possessed by demons, that I had become dangerous to the spiritual purity of the group.
How would that affect how your own children see you?
My babies were taught to pray for my soul every night, to ask God to either save me or to help them forget the poison I might have planted in their hearts during their childhood. Can you imagine that, Tony? Being 12 years old and praying to forget your own mother?
That level of psychological manipulation. When you look back now, how do you recognize the methods they used?
The isolation was everything. We weren't allowed newspapers, television, radio, books from the outside world. Our education stopped at basic reading and arithmetic. Women especially were kept ignorant of anything beyond cooking, cleaning, and child-rearing.
And yet, here you are, Sarah, articulating complex ideas, navigating legal systems, building a new life. How did you bridge that gap?
The first year was terrifying. I remember standing in a grocery store, overwhelmed by the choices. Dozens of breakfast cereals. I had never made a decision about food in my life. Everything had been decided for me, prepared for me, handed to me.
What was the turning point in adapting to the outside world?
A librarian named Mrs. Chen. I was living in a shelter, and she noticed me sitting in the library every day, just watching people use computers. She approached me gently, asked if I needed help learning. When I told her I'd never touched a computer, never sent an email, she didn't judge. She just said, "Would you like to learn?"
That must have opened up an entirely new world.
The internet was revelation and terror combined. Suddenly I could access all the information that had been kept from me. Medical facts, legal rights, other stories of people who had escaped cults. But I also discovered how much the world had changed while I was locked away for 20 years.
What surprised you most about how society had evolved?
Women, Tony. The roles women could play, the choices they could make. In the compound, a woman's value was measured entirely by her obedience and fertility. Learning that women could be doctors, lawyers, business owners, that they could choose not to marry, not to have children. It was like discovering I was a member of a species I'd never known existed.
How does that realization change how you view your past self?
Pause. It makes me grieve for the girl I was at 18. She never had a chance to discover who she might have become. I was handed over to David like property, and I accepted it because I didn't know there was any other way to exist.
Do you feel anger toward that younger version of yourself?
Sometimes. I remember moments when I questioned things, when something felt wrong, but I pushed those thoughts away. I chose compliance over curiosity, safety over truth. But then I remind myself that choice requires knowledge of alternatives, and I simply didn't have that knowledge.
When you think about your children now, what do you hope for them?
I hope Rebecca found a way to resist. I hope she remembered the conversations we had when she was young, before she understood they were dangerous. I used to tell her stories about women in history, brave women who changed the world. I disguised them as parables, but I was really trying to plant seeds.
What kind of seeds?
The idea that a woman's mind was as valuable as her body, that asking questions wasn't a sin, that feeling trapped meant something was wrong with the trap, not with her. I don't know if those seeds survived the years of indoctrination after I left, but I have to believe they're still there somewhere.
And the twins? How do you imagine their lives now?
Michael would be 24 now. In the compound, he'd be married, probably to multiple wives, already raising children to believe the same lies we believed. Ruth would be married too, maybe pregnant with her third or fourth child. The cycle continues, Tony. That's the most heartbreaking part.
Is there any legal recourse for getting your children back or even establishing contact?
I've consulted lawyers. The problem is that my children are adults now, legally free to make their own choices. Even if I could prove they were brainwashed, they have the right to choose their brainwashing. The law protects religious freedom, even when that freedom is actually imprisonment.
How do you find peace with that reality?
Some days I don't. Some days I wake up, and the first thought in my head is that I failed as a mother, that I should have found a way to take them with me, or should have stayed and tried to protect them from within.
But you said yourself that Rebecca was already being watched by Marcus.
Yes, and that's what I tell myself on the better days, That staying would have meant watching my daughter become another man's property, watching my sons learn to treat women as possessions. Maybe by leaving, by speaking out, I'm fighting for grandchildren I may never meet.
The work you're doing now with the FBI, trying to build a case against Marcus, how does that connect to your children?
Every piece of evidence I provide, every law enforcement official I educate about how these groups operate, every interview like this one. It's all for them, Tony. I can't save my children, but maybe I can save someone else's children. Maybe I can prevent other mothers from facing the choice I faced.
Do you ever imagine a reunion with them?
Softly every day. But in my imagination, they would have to choose me over everything they've been taught to believe about God, family, and salvation. I'm asking them to lose their heaven for me, and that's not a fair request to make of anyone, even your own children.
Sarah, we've talked about your escape, the immediate aftermath, but I'm curious about something deeper. When you look back at those 20 years now, what memories do you find yourself holding on to?
Long pause. That's a question I wrestle with every day, Tony. People expect me to say I remember nothing good, that it was all darkness. But that's not true, and that makes it harder somehow.
How so?
There were moments of genuine connection with the other women. Quiet conversations while we prepared meals together, sharing stories about our children when the men weren't around. We created pockets of warmth in that cold place.
Those relationships were real, even within the constraints of the community?
They were real to us. We were all trapped in the same cage, Tony. We understood each other's pain without having to speak it aloud. There was this woman, older than me, who had been there since she was 14. She taught me small acts of rebellion.
What kind of rebellion?
She showed me how to hide books in the root cellar. Nothing dangerous, just old novels someone had smuggled in years before. For 30 minutes at a time, while everyone thought we were checking the preserves, we'd read about worlds beyond our compound.
Reading was forbidden?
Not forbidden exactly, but controlled. We could read approved religious texts, basic education materials, but fiction, stories about women making their own choices, that was dangerous territory.
Do you feel guilty about finding good memories in such a harmful place?
Pause every single day. When I speak to reporters, when I testify, I feel like I'm betraying those moments of kindness. But then I remember that's exactly how these places survive, Tony. They give you just enough human connection to make you question whether leaving is worth losing everything.
That sounds like a sophisticated form of psychological control.
Absolutely is. The leader, he understood that complete misery would drive people away. So he allowed us these small comforts, these relationships, knowing they would become chains. When I finally left, I wasn't just leaving behind abuse. I was leaving behind every friend I'd ever had.
Have you had any contact with anyone still inside since your escape?
No direct contact. It's too dangerous for them and for me. But I hear things through networks of other survivors. Some of the women I was closest to are still there. They've had more children. Their oldest daughters are approaching the age I was when I was married off.
That must be incredibly difficult to process.
It keeps me awake at night, Tony. I think about those little girls I watched grow up, wondering if they remember the stories I used to tell them about the outside world. Wondering if any seeds I planted are still growing in their minds.
Do you feel responsible for the people you left behind?
Voice breaking slightly. That's the burden every survivor carries. We escape, but we know exactly what we're leaving others to endure. There's this constant guilt that by saving myself, I somehow abandoned them.
But surely you understand that staying wouldn't have helped them.
Intellectually, yes, I know that. My therapist reminds me constantly that I couldn't save anyone else until I saved myself. But the heart doesn't always listen to logic, does it?
You mentioned therapy. How has that process been for you?
Complicated. I'm learning to separate the genuine relationships I had from the system that controlled them. It's like trying to save photographs from a house fire. You want to preserve the good memories, but they're all smoke-damaged by the context they existed in.
That's a powerful metaphor. Are you able to forgive yourself for the good memories?
I'm working on it. My therapist says healing means accepting that I can mourn the community I lost while still fighting against what it represented, that I can miss people while condemning the system that trapped us all.
How has this internal work affected your mission to expose what happened?
It's made me more determined, actually, because now I understand how they hook people. It's not just fear and control, it's the promise of belonging, of family, of purpose. They give you real emotional experiences and then hold them hostage.
So, your fight isn't just about justice for yourself.
No, Tony. It's about every woman still in there who thinks those small moments of happiness mean the system isn't so bad. It's about the teenage girls who might mistake being chosen for marriage as being chosen for love. It's about breaking the cycle before another generation gets caught in it.
That's an enormous responsibility you've taken on.
It's the only way I can live with the memories, both the terrible ones and the beautiful ones, by making sure they serve a purpose bigger than my own healing.
Sarah, we've been talking for a while now about your escape from the compound, your new life, but I sense there's something more you haven't told me yet. Something that changed everything for you.
Long pause. You're very perceptive, Tony. There is something I discovered about 6 months after I left that made me question everything I thought I knew about my time there.
What kind of discovery?
I was staying at that safe house, remember? The one run by the organization that helps cult survivors. There was a woman there, maybe 10 years older than me. She'd been asking me questions about the compound, about Brother Marcus, our leader. Very specific questions.
What sort of questions?
About the finances, about who came and went, about the outside contractors who worked on our buildings. I thought she was just curious, maybe writing a book or something. But then one day she sat me down and told me she was FBI.
FBI?
Agent Rebecca Chen. She'd been investigating our compound for 3 years, Tony. 3 years. And what she told me that day, it shattered everything I thought I understood about why I was really there.
I'm listening.
The polygamy, the religious teachings, the isolation. It was all a front, Tony. Brother Marcus wasn't running a religious community. He was running a money laundering operation.
Money laundering?
The marriages, especially the ones to very young women like me, they weren't about his twisted religious beliefs. We were being used as legal wives to open bank accounts, to sign documents, to move money without it being traced back to him.
So when you were forced to marry him at 18...
I wasn't just becoming another wife in his collection. I was becoming a financial instrument. Agent Chen showed me records, Tony. Bank accounts I didn't even know existed, all opened in my name. Property deeds I'd supposedly signed. Investment accounts.
You had no memory of signing these things.
That's the thing. I did remember signing papers. Brother Marcus would bring stacks of documents to me, tell me they were religious contracts, temple records, things like that. I was taught never to question, only to obey, so I signed whatever he put in front of me.
And these documents were...
Real estate purchases, business incorporations, loan applications, millions of dollars moving through accounts that had my name on them. The other wives, too. We were all unknowing participants in this massive criminal enterprise.
How did that make you feel, learning this?
Pause at first. Relief. Strange as that sounds. For 20 years, I'd blamed myself for not being faithful enough, not being worthy of God's love. I thought my misery was because I was spiritually deficient.
But it wasn't about religion at all.
It was about greed. Pure criminal greed. All those sermons about sacrifice and devotion, all those punishments when we questioned anything. It was just to keep us compliant while he used us to hide millions of dollars from drug trafficking, weapons sales, human trafficking.
Human trafficking?
The girls who came to live with us, the ones Brother Marcus said were seeking religious guidance, they weren't all there by choice, Tony. Some of them were being held, moved through our compound, then shipped elsewhere.
Did you know this was happening at the time?
No. We were so compartmentalized, so isolated from each other. I thought those girls were like me, seeking spiritual fulfillment. I even tried to help some of them adjust to our way of life.
How does that sit with you now?
It's the hardest part to live with, knowing that while I was suffering, I was also unknowingly helping perpetuate suffering for others. Agent Chen assured me I was a victim too, but that doesn't make the guilt disappear.
Is that why you decided to testify against him?
Partly. But also because I realized my escape wasn't just about saving myself anymore. It was about stopping him from destroying other lives. When I understood the scope of what he was doing, staying silent became impossible.
And this changed how you saw your 20 years there.
Completely. I wasn't a failed spiritual seeker. I was a victim of an elaborate criminal conspiracy. My husband wasn't a misguided religious leader. He was a criminal who had stolen 20 years of my life to profit from illegal activities.
That must have been both liberating and terrifying to realize.
The truth usually is, Tony. Liberating and terrifying in equal measure. But at least it was finally the truth.
Sarah, you mentioned earlier that you always felt different from the other wives in the community. Can you tell me more about what you mean by that?
Long pause, Tony. There's something I've never told anyone. Not the FBI, not my therapist. Something I discovered just before I escaped.
What was it?
I found my real birth certificate hidden in Elder Matthews' office. The one I'd been given my whole life was a forgery.
I'm not sure I understand what you're getting at, Sarah.
My mother wasn't just another wife in the community, Tony. She was an outsider, a woman who'd been kidnapped when she was pregnant with me.
Pause, Sarah. That changes everything about your story, doesn't it?
It explains why I always questioned things when the other children didn't. Why I remembered fragments of lullabies that weren't from our hymnal. Why Elder Matthews watched me so carefully all those years.
Did you confront him about this discovery?
I tried to. The night before I escaped, I went to his house with the certificate. He told me my mother had died trying to leave the community when I was 3.
But you'd been told she died in childbirth.
Exactly. He said she'd tried to take me with her, but the community couldn't let that happen. They couldn't risk exposure to the outside world.
So when you escaped, you weren't just leaving a cult. You were finishing what your mother started.
Voice breaking, Tony. I spent 20 years believing I belonged there, believing my doubts made me sinful, defective, learning the truth. It freed something in me.
Is that why you've been so determined to expose them? It's not just about your own trauma.
I'm fighting for her too. For the woman who died trying to save us both, and for every other woman who might be taken the way she was.
Sarah, knowing what you know now about your origins, how does that change how you see those 20 years?
Every act of rebellion, every moment I resisted, every time I protected another wife from harm. Those weren't failures of faith, Tony. They were my mother's strength living on in me.
You were never truly one of them.
No. And maybe that's why I could find the courage to leave. I was always meant for the outside world.
The recording we made yesterday, when do we release it to the authorities, Sarah?
Detective Morrison said she needs 48 hours to coordinate with the FBI task force. That gives us until tomorrow evening.
And you're certain about this timing? Once we go public, there's no turning back.
I've been running for 2 years, Tony. Hiding, looking over my shoulder, jumping at every shadow. I'm tired of being afraid.
But this isn't just about your safety anymore. We're talking about bringing down an entire organization.
That's exactly why it has to be now. Every day we wait, more girls like I was are being married off to old men. More children are being born into that prison.
Walk me through what happens after we release this. What are you expecting?
Long pause, chaos, honestly. The community will close ranks even tighter. They'll call me a liar, a traitor seduced by the outside world.
That doesn't scare you?
It terrifies me. But you know what scares me more? The thought that my silence makes me complicit in what's happening to those girls right now.
You mentioned that some of your former sister wives have been reaching out privately.
3 of them, yes. They're not ready to leave yet, but they're asking questions. Real questions about the outside world, about their rights.
Do you think they'll come forward once our story breaks?
Maybe. Rebecca has 2 daughters approaching the age when marriages are arranged. She's desperate to protect them, but she's also scared of losing them entirely if she leaves.
That's an impossible choice for any mother.
That's how the prophet maintains control, Tony. He makes every choice feel impossible, until staying seems like the only option.
But you found another way.
I got lucky. My husband made a mistake that night, gave me an opening. Most women never get that chance.
What would you say to them if you could? To the women still trapped inside?
Voice strengthening, that they're not crazy for questioning, that the voice in their head telling them something's wrong, that voice is right, and that there's a whole world out here waiting for them.
Tomorrow changes everything, doesn't it?
Tomorrow, we stop letting evil hide behind the word of God.
Sarah, tomorrow is the day. How are you feeling about testifying?
Long pause. I keep thinking about that 18-year-old girl who walked into that ceremony in a white dress she never chose. She had no idea what was coming.
And now here you are, about to face the man who orchestrated all of it.
When I look in the mirror now, Tony, I see someone I barely recognize. Stronger than I ever thought possible, but also terrified.
What terrifies you most about tomorrow?
That he'll look at me the same way he always did. Like I'm nothing. Like my voice doesn't matter. For 20 years, that's all I knew.
But you're not that person anymore.
No, I'm not. Pause Detective Morrison called this morning. They found 3 more families willing to testify. Women who heard my story and found their courage.
How does that feel, knowing you've given others that strength?
Heavy, hopeful, overwhelming. I never wanted to be anyone's hero, Tony. I just wanted to be free.
You've walked us through so much pain, Sarah. What keeps you going when it gets this difficult?
Voice strengthening. Every night in that compound, I used to lie awake wondering if there was a world beyond those gates, where women could speak their minds, where children could laugh without fear, where love was chosen, not assigned.
And now you know there is.
Now I know there is. And I'm fighting to make sure those people back there know it too. Tomorrow isn't just about putting him behind bars. It's about telling every woman still trapped that escape is possible.
What will you be thinking about when you walk into that courtroom?
My daughter. The one I lost. The children still there who deserve better. And that scared 18-year-old who thought she had no choice.
You're giving her a voice.
I'm giving her justice. Pause. 20 years late. But justice all the same.
Are you ready for this, Sarah?
I don't know if anyone's ever really ready to face their demons, Tony. But I'm done running from mine. Tomorrow I speak my truth. Whatever happens after that, I'll have done everything I could.
That 18-year-old would be proud of who you've become.
Softly. I hope so. I really hope so.
Sarah, we've reached the moment you've been building toward for months. You're standing outside the courthouse with Detective Morrison, about to testify against Brother Marcus. What's going through your mind?
Long pause. 20 years of my life, Tony. 20 years of being told I was nothing without him, without the community. And suddenly, I'm the one person who can bring it all down.
Were you afraid?
Terrified. Not of Marcus anymore, but of what it meant. Once I walked through those doors, there was no going back to any version of the life I knew.
Tell me about seeing him again.
He looked so small, Tony. This man who had seemed like a giant, who controlled every breath I took for 2 decades. Sitting there in his orange jumpsuit, he was just a frightened old man who'd run out of people to hide behind.
Did he try to intimidate you?
He stared at me the entire time I spoke. That same stare that used to make me want to disappear into the walls. But something had changed in me during those months on the outside.
What had changed?
I'd remembered who I was before he told me who to be. That 18-year-old girl who'd asked questions, who'd wondered about the world beyond the compound. She was still there, Sarah. She'd just been waiting.
How did it feel to finally speak your truth?
Like breaking a dam I'd been holding back for years. Every word felt dangerous and necessary at the same time. I told them about the forced marriages, the girls who were even younger than I'd been, the money he'd stolen from families.
Was there a moment when you knew you'd won?
When I saw two of the other wives in the gallery. They'd come to support him, but I watched their faces change as I spoke. I saw recognition there, Sarah. They were remembering their own stories, their own stolen choices.
What did that mean to you?
That maybe I wasn't just saving myself anymore. Maybe I was giving them permission to save themselves too.
The verdict came back guilty on all counts.
Oz. I felt empty at first, not victorious, just empty. Like I'd been holding my breath for 20 years and finally exhaled. The life I'd known was truly over, but for the first time, that felt like freedom instead of loss.
Sarah, you're standing in that courtroom watching Marcus get sentenced. What's going through your mind?
Long pause, 20 years of my life walking out in handcuffs. But I kept thinking about the girls still trapped there, Tony.
The verdict came back guilty on all counts. How did that feel?
Like I could finally breathe, but also terrifying. This was the man who controlled everything I knew for 2 decades.
You testified against him. That took incredible courage.
I kept my eyes on his face when they read the charges. He looked so small suddenly, not the giant who haunted my dreams.
What did you want him to understand in that moment?
That I wasn't his property anymore. That none of us ever were. Pause when I walked out of that courthouse. I realized something changed inside me, Tony.
What changed?
I stopped running. For the first time since I escaped, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I was looking forward.
So here we are, Sarah, at the end of your incredible journey. When you look back now, what's the most important thing you've learned about yourself?
Long pause that I was never broken, Tony. For 20 years, they told me I was incomplete without their structure, without him. But I was whole all along.
And the world outside that you were so afraid of?
It's complicated, messy, sometimes cruel. But it's also full of choices, real choices. Every morning I wake up and decide what to wear, what to eat, where to go. Such simple things, but they're mine.
The legal battle is over. Marcus is facing justice. Do you feel vindicated?
Vindicated feels too small. I feel responsible. To the women still inside, to the girls who will never have to go through what I did. This was never just about me.
What comes next for Sarah?
Soft smile. I'm 41 years old and I'm just beginning to live. I think that's enough for now.
Sarah, it's been 6 months since we first spoke. How do you feel when you look back at that woman who knocked on my door?
She feels like a stranger now, Tony. So afraid, so broken. I barely recognized my own voice then.
And now? What's different?
I know who I am. Not who they said I was, not who they made me become. Just Sarah. Pause, it's taken 38 years to say that and mean it.
The compound was raided last week. Jeremiah and 12 others were arrested. Any regrets about speaking out?
None. Those children deserve better than I had. They deserve choices.
What would you tell someone still trapped in that world?
That freedom isn't comfortable at first. It's terrifying. But on the other side of that fear is a life that belongs to you. Long pause, and that's worth everything.
Thank you, Sarah, for your courage and for trusting us with your story.
Thank you, Tony, for helping me find my voice again.